In a world where wealth can vanish in a heartbeat, Destiny Williams learns that blood isn't always thicker than water. After her billionaire parents perish in a tragic plane crash, her greedy uncle Marcus and Aunt Monica use a legal gangbang of forged documents and threats to seize her inheritance and cast her into the streets. Reduced from a princess to a silent beggar, Destiny's life hangs by a thread until she collapses at the gates of Jin Ho Park, a legendary Korean mafia boss known as the Dragon. Struck by her resilience, Jin Ho takes her in and uncovers the rot of the Hayes betrayal. Hello, family. Welcome to Afro Soul Mafia Stories. Before we proceed to the story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Kindly drop it in the comment section and also subscribe to this channel. Now let's continue with the story. The golden gates of the Williams estate didn't just serve as a barrier to the outside world. They were the entrance to a sanctuary where the air seemed to hum with a different frequency of peace. For 17-year-old Destiny Williams, life was a tapestry woven from the finest silk and the warmest light. Every morning began with the soft chime of a grandfather clock echoing through a hallway lined with original Renaissance art, leading to a breakfast room where the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked 300 acres of manicured rolling hills. To the world, her father, Elias Williams, was a titan of industry, the man who had revolutionized global logistics. To her mother, Sarah, he was a partner in a mission of radical kindness. But to Destiny, they were simply the two people who made her feel like the center of an unshakable universe. Her days were spent within the hallowed, ivy-covered walls of St. Jude's International, the kind of elite academy where the children of presidents and monarchs studied. Yet, Destiny never carried herself with the arrogance of her peers. She had watched her father spend his Saturday mornings in the city's poorest wards, not just signing checks, but shaking hands and listening to stories. She had watched her mother organize multi-million-dollar galas only to spend the late hours of the night personally ensuring that the staff's families were taken care of. "Wealth, destiny," Elias would often say, his voice deep and resonant with a warmth that felt like a physical embrace, "is not a throne to sit on. It's a tool to build bridges for those who have to swim against the current." This philosophy of grace extended most prominently to their own blood. The sprawling east wing of the mansion was often occupied by Uncle Marcus and Aunt Monica. Destiny remembered the emergency dinners where Marcus, with his stocky frame hunched in feigned defeat and his square jaw tight with a practiced stress, would explain his latest failed venture. Beside him, Monica would dab at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her sharp features softened by a mask of desperation. "Elias, the market was brutal this quarter," Marcus would sigh, his eyes shifting calculate behind the rim of his wine glass. "I'm looking at losing the house. Monica is terrified." Without a moment's hesitation, Elias would reach into his breast pocket. The scratch of his fountain pen on paper was a sound Destiny had heard a dozen times. "Family is family, Marcus," her father would say, sliding a check for $200,000 across the mahogany table. "Consider it handled. Don't let Monica worry another night." Monica would offer a smile that felt warm but never quite reached her cold, calculating eyes. "You're a saint, Elias. Truly, what would we ever do without you?" Destiny, sitting at the end of the table, would watch the exchange with a sense of pride. She was proud to be a Williams. She was proud of the abundance that allowed them to be the anchor for their struggling relatives. She saw the designer handbags Monica carried and the polished shoes Marcus wore, purchased with her father's loans, and felt only happiness that they could live well too. On the final morning of the Golden Era, the estate was bathed in a particularly brilliant sunrise. Destiny was dressed in her crisp school blazer, her afro curls perfectly coiffed and framed by a designer headband. Her parents were heading to a charity conference in Seoul, a trip they had been planning for months. The foyer was filled with the scent of fresh lilies and the excitement of departure. "Study hard, my princess," Elias said, lifting her chin to look into her almond-shaped eyes, which at that moment held nothing but the reflection of a bright future. He pulled her into a hug, his charcoal suit smelling of sandalwood and success. "We'll be back before the weekend. I've already spoken to the dean about your early graduation ceremony. We wouldn't miss it for the world." Sarah leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to Destiny's cheek. "The Hayes will be here this evening to stay with you while we're gone. Monica said she wanted to take you shopping for a new gown. Try to be patient with her, okay? Destiny laughed, the sound bright and carefree. I will, Mom. Safe travels. I love you both. She stood on the gravel driveway, waving until the silver tail of the limousine disappeared around the bend. She spent the day in a haze of productive boredom, excelling in her mock trials at school and planning the surprises she would prepare for her parents' return. By evening, the storm had begun to roll in, a rare, violent tempest that turned the sky an bruised shade of purple. Marcus and Monica arrived early, settling into the library with a bottle of her father's most expensive vintage, their eyes wandering over the gold-leafed ceilings with a strange, hungry intensity that Destiny was too young to decipher. The silence of the house was shattered not by thunder, but by the frantic ringing of the landline. Then came the television. Destiny was in the kitchen, asking the chef for a late-night snack, when she saw the red banner scroll across the bottom of the news screen. Breaking, private jet belonging to Williams Global lost contact over the Pacific. Search and rescue operations underway amidst severe weather conditions. The tray in the chef's hand hit the floor with a deafening crash. Destiny felt the world tilt, the air suddenly turning into thick, unbreathable ice. She stumbled into the library, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Marcus and Monica were standing in front of the large television. They weren't crying. They weren't reaching for the phone. They stood perfectly still, bathed in the blue light of the broadcast. Uncle Marcus, Destiny whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. The plane! They said the plane. Marcus turned slowly. The smug grin was gone, replaced by a cold, hard-set expression she had never seen before. He didn't move to comfort her. He didn't offer a hand. He simply looked at his watch, the Patek Philippe her father had given him for Christmas, and then at Monica. The search area is 10,000 square miles, Marcus said, his voice devoid of the warmth he usually performed for Elia's. In this storm, no one survives that. Monica narrowed her eyes, her gaze drifting toward the safe behind the painting on the far wall. The mask of the grateful aunt had slipped entirely, revealing a sharp, predatory edge. Destiny stood alone in the center of the room, the granddaughter clock ticking like a countdown to a funeral, as the golden cage of her life began to dissolve into the shadows of the coming night. The transition from billionaire heiress to invisible ghost happened with a speed that was as violent as the storm still raging outside the Williams estate. Within 48 hours of the plane disappearing from the radar, the sanctuary Destiny had known her entire life was invaded. Marcus and Monica didn't wait for a death certificate. They moved with the precision of scavengers who had been rehearsing this theft for years. While the Coast Guard was still scouring the dark waters of the Pacific, the Hays were in the study, gangbanging the legal system with a team of lawyers who seemed to emerge from the shadows. Documents were produced, forged signatures that looked hauntingly like her father's, nomming Marcus as the sole executor and guardian of all Williams' assets. Destiny stood in the center of the grand foyer, her eyes red from crying, watching as two men in gray uniforms began to crate her mother's favorite sculptures. When she tried to protest, Marcus caught her by the arm. His grip was no longer the soft, supportive hold of an uncle. It was a vice that bruised her skin. He leaned down, his face a mask of cold indifference, his breath smelling of the expensive bourbon he had stolen from her father's private collection. Listen to me carefully, you little brat, Marcus hissed, the smugness in his eyes replaced by a lethal sharpness. Your parents are dead. This house, the money, the cars, it's all ours now. You're a liability we don't need. If you open your mouth to the police, the press, or even a stranger on the street about inheritance, I will make sure you disappear just like that plane. Do you understand? The world is a dangerous place for a girl who doesn't know when to be quiet. Monica stood behind him, crossing her arms over a designer blouse Destiny had seen her mother buy. She didn't offer a word of comfort. Throw her out, Marcus, she said, her voice like a thin line of ice. The cleaners are coming to prep the house for our victory gala. I don't want her dirt on the carpets. With one violent shove, Destiny was pushed through the massive oak doors into the freezing rain. The heavy thud of the door closing behind her was the last sound she heard of her old life. She had nothing but the clothes on her back, a school blazer that was quickly soaked through, and the small, cracked, framed photo of her parents she had managed to hide under her shirt. Weeks bled into a blur of gray concrete and gnawing hunger. The Princess of Seoul was gone, replaced by a shadow that haunted the alleyways of the industrial district. Her beautiful, thick afro curls, once her pride and her mother's joy, became matted with dirt and rain, clumped together into a tangled crown of misery. She had found a discarded, oversized navy jacket in a dumpster. It was stained and smelled of damp earth, but it was the only shield she had against a city that had suddenly turned its back on her. The hunger was a constant, physical ache, a hollow roaring in her stomach that made her lightheaded and weak. She learned the bitter art of the silent beggar, standing near the back of bakeries hopping for a stale crust, her voice locked away behind the wall of trauma Marcus had built. Every time she thought about asking for help, she saw her uncle's face, heard the threat of being buried, and the words died in her throat. Fear had become her only companion. But the elements weren't her only enemy. Marcus was thorough. He didn't just want her gone, he wanted her monitored. Every few days, the low rumble of a black SUV would echo through the narrow streets. Destiny would freeze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew those cars. She knew the men inside, the watchers, Marcus's hired goons who patrolled the district to ensure the Williams problem stayed buried in the trash. One evening, as she was nursing a split lip from a fall, the headlights of a familiar SUV swept across the brick wall of her alley. Destiny scrambled backward, her hands scraping against the rough pavement as she dove behind a rusted, overflowing dumpster. She pressed her face into the cold metal, holding her breath until her lungs burned. Through a crack in the plastic, she saw the vehicle crawl past, its tinted windows reflecting the neon glow of a nearby liquor store. She watched the taillights fade into the mist, her body trembling with a mix of cold and sheer terror. She was 17 years old, a girl who had been taught that the world was built on bridges of kindness, now realizing that for those at the bottom, the world was nothing but a series of jagged edges. Her rich, deep brown skin was now ashy and bruised, her almond eyes once filled with defiance, now reflecting only the hollow sadness of a survivor who was losing the will to fight. She was a ghost in her own city, a billionaire's daughter who had been erased, waiting for the cold or the hunger to finally finish the job her uncle had started. Every night she fell asleep on a bed of damp cardboard, she clutched the photo of her parents to her chest, whispering a silent apology to the two people who had thought they had left her the world, only for it to be stolen by the vultures they had fed at their own table. The storm that had pursued Destiny through the jagged streets of the industrial district finally decided to finish her. The rain turned into a freezing sleet that coated the pavement in a treacherous glass, and the wind howled through the canyons of glass and steel like a predator closing in for the kill. Destiny stumbled, her legs feeling like lead weights, her breath coming in shallow, wheezing hitches. She had walked for miles, driven by a primal instinct she didn't know she possessed, moving away from the dark alleys where Marcus's watchers lurked and toward the shimmering lights of the high-rise district, the only place that still reminded her of the world she had lost. Her oversized jacket was a sodden weight, dragging her down, and her thin sneakers had long since soaked through. Her vision was blurring, the neon signs of the city bleeding into streaks of gold and crimson. Ahead, a pair of massive, intricate iron gates loomed out of the mist, guarding the entrance to one of the most exclusive addresses in the city, the Park Penthouse. To anyone else, it was a fortress of wealth. To Destiny, in her delirium, it looked like a final resting place. She reached for the cold metal bars, her fingers numb and unfeeling, and as her strength finally buckled, she sank to the ground. The cracked photo of her parents was still pressed against her chest, a small, hard square of hope that was the only thing keeping her heart beating. The world went dark just as the low, rhythmic hum of a powerful engine vibrated through the concrete beneath her. A motorcade of 3 armored black sedans pulled up to the gate, their headlights cutting through the sleet like twin suns. In the center vehicle, Jin-Ho Park sat in the absolute silence of the rear cabin, his sharp jawline set in a mask of stoic fatigue. He had just spent 22 hours in the air, closing a deal in Macau that would shift the power dynamics of the Pacific Rim, and his intense, dark brown eyes reflected a weariness that went deeper than bone. He was a man who lived in a world of variables and threats, a man who had built a kingdom on the discipline of never letting his guard down. As the gates began to groan open, the lead car came to an abrupt halt. Through the rain-streaked window, Jin-ho saw his security detail, men built like granite blocks, exit the front vehicle. One of the guards, a man named Min-soo, approached the crumpled heap of rags lying in the slush against the gate. With a look of professional indifference, Min-soo reached down to grab Destiny by the collar of her oversized jacket, intending to drag the nuisance out of the path of the boss's car. "Wait." The voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of an absolute command. Jin-ho had opened his door, stepping out into the freezing night. He didn't wear a coat. His navy wool suit was perfectly tailored, his Patek Philippe glinting under the streetlights as he moved toward the gate. The rain began to bead on his slicked-back black hair, but he didn't seem to notice the cold. "Sir, it's just a vagrant," Min-soo said, his hand still hovering over Destiny's shoulder. "I'll clear the way immediately." Jin-ho didn't answer. He walked closer, his gaze falling on the girl. Even in the darkness, the contrast was jarring. This was a girl who had been hollowed out by the world, her deep brown skin ashy from the cold, her matted afro curls clinging to her face like a shroud. But as the guard's rough movement caused her to stir, her eyes flickered open for a fraction of a second. In that heartbeat, Jin-ho Park saw something he hadn't expected. He didn't see the vacant stare of the defeated or the dull plea of a victim. Beneath the layers of fear and exhaustion, there was a spark of pure, unadulterated defiance. It was the look of a soldier who refused to surrender even as the walls closed in. It was a warrior's soul, trapped in a body that had been failed by everyone. It was a reflection of the same fire that had allowed Jin-ho to survive his own ascent through the blood-soaked ranks of the underworld. The girl's hand tightened around the object hidden under her jacket, her knuckles white. She looked at the towering man in the expensive suit, not with hope, but with a challenge, as if daring the universe to take one more thing from her. Then, her eyes rolled back, and she went limp once more. The silence that followed was broken only by the hiss of the rain. The guards stood frozen, waiting for the order to continue. They expected Jin-ho to turn away, to let them handle the messy business of poverty so he could return to his sanctuary. Instead, the Dragon of the East did something that would become a legend among his men. He leaned down, ignoring the slush that ruined the polish of his handmade shoes. He slid one arm beneath Destiny's knees and the other behind her back. As he lifted her, he was struck by how little she weighed. She was a ghost, a feather caught in a storm. Her head fell against his shoulder, her cold breath a faint puff against his neck. "Cancel my meetings for tomorrow," Jin-ho said, his voice dropping into a low, intimidating register that signaled a shift in the atmosphere. "And call Dr. Eris. Tell him to meet us in the medical suite, now." Min-soo scrambled to open the door of the lead sedan. "Sir, you shouldn't. The protocol." Jin-ho turned his head slightly, his piercing gaze locking onto the guard. The quiet intensity in his eyes was enough to make the larger man take a step back. "Protocol changed the moment she didn't stop fighting," Jin-ho replied. He carried her into the car, shielding her small frame from the wind with his own body. As the motorcade moved through the gates and up the winding drive toward the penthouse, Jin-ho looked down at the girl in his arms. Her hand had slipped from her jacket, revealing the corner of the cracked photo. He didn't know who she was, or what haze had done to put her here, but as the warmth of the car began to melt the ice from her hair, he felt a strange, unfamiliar pull of responsibility. The world had tried to erase Destiny Williams, but she had collapsed at the one threshold in the city where a warrior was always recognized. As the elevator rose toward the clouds, the billionaire's daughter was no longer alone. She was in the arms of the only man in the city powerful enough to turn her silence into a scream that would tear down her uncle's world. The transition from the freezing pavement to the sterile warmth of the park penthouse was a blur of fragmented sensations. The scent of rain-damp wool, the rhythmic hum of a high-speed elevator, and a pair of dark, piercing eyes that seemed to anchor her soul before she drifted back into the darkness. When Destiny finally opened her eyes, the world no longer smelled of wet cardboard and exhaust fumes. Instead, the air was crisp, filtered to a perfect, scentless purity, carrying the faint, metallic tang of high-end medical equipment. She was lying in a bed so soft it felt as though she were floating on a cloud. For months, her body had been a map of aches, her joints stiff from sleeping on concrete, and her skin perpetually chilled to the bone. "Now, A weighted silk duvet provided a warmth that seeped deep into her marrow. The room was a masterpiece of minimalist, high-tech design, walls of brushed steel and frosted glass, with a bank of silent monitors glowing with a steady, rhythmic pulse that she realized was her own heartbeat. It was a cold, sleek sanctuary, a place that felt more like a laboratory for a princess than a hospital ward. Destiny moved her hand, feeling the smooth texture of the sheets, and a sharp, sudden memory of her parents' home flashed through her mind. This was the luxury she had been born into, but it felt alien now, a ghost of a life that had been violently stolen. As her gaze swept the room, she froze. In the far corner, draped in a shadow that the soft ambient lighting couldn't quite reach, sat Jin-Ho Park. He had traded his suit jacket for a black leather piece, though he still looked every bit the commander of an empire. He sat perfectly still, his long legs crossed, a Patek Philippe watch catching the dim light as he leaned his sharp jaw against a closed fist. His stoic expression was unreadable, but his dark brown eyes were locked onto her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He didn't speak. He simply watched, his gaze capable of reading the secrets she had buried in the mud. A soft chime signaled the door opening, and a man in a white coat placed a tray on a rolling mahogany table, sliding it over the bed before quietly exiting. The scent hit Destiny like a physical blow, rich, savory, and real. It was a gourmet spread, a delicate bowl of abalone porridge, seared Wagyu beef sliced into thin ribbons, and a glass of chilled, fresh-pressed juice. Jin-Ho made a slight gesture with his hand, a silent command for her to eat. Destiny's first instinct was to tear into the food like the starving animal the streets had made her, her stomach cramped with a desperate, hollow roar. But as she reached for the silver spoon, a silver thread memory of her mother's voice stopped her. Even when the world is chaotic, Destiny, your dignity is the one thing no one can take unless you give it away. Under Jin-Ho's silent, watchful gaze, a transformation occurred. Destiny sat up, her spine straightening with a phantom elegance. Her movements, though slow and weakened by months of malnutrition, became deliberate. She placed the linen napkin across her lap with trembling but precise fingers. She lifted the spoon with a steady hand, sipping the porridge with a quiet, refined grace that belonged in a palace, not a back alley. She ate in total silence, the only sound the faint clink of silver against porcelain. She didn't look at him, but she felt his curiosity shifting. Jin-Ho Park had seen thousands of people break. He had seen billionaires beg for their lives and street thugs crumble under a single look. He had expected this girl to eat with the desperation of the dying. Instead, he was witnessing the resurrection of an aristocrat. He watched the way she held her glass, the way she tilted her head, small, ingrained habits of the elite that no amount of poverty had been able to wash away. His eyebrows twitched almost imperceptibly. This wasn't just a stray he had picked up from the rain. This was a girl who had once stood on a foundation as high as his own. As she finished, Destiny finally turned her head, her almond-shaped eyes meeting his. The innocence was still there, shadowed by a profound, haunting sadness, but the defiance he had seen at the gate had solidified into something sharper. She was no longer just surviving, she was reclaiming the space around her. Jin-Ho stood up, his tall, muscular frame casting a long shadow across the medical suite. He walked to the edge of the bed, his presence commanding and heavy, but he didn't lean over her. He respected the distance she had reclaimed. "You have the manners of a girl who was raised in the light," Jin-Ho said, his voice a low, melodic rumble that vibrated through the room. "But you were found in the dark. The clothes you wore were rags, but the photo you held was of Elias and Sarah Williams." Destiny's breath hitched at the mention of her parents' names. The silence Marcus had forced upon her felt like a physical weight in her throat, a jagged stone she couldn't swallow. She looked at Jin-Ho, searching for the calculation of a predator, but found only the quiet intensity of a man who dealt in the truth. "I am Jin-Ho Park," he continued, his stare becoming intimidating, yet strangely protective. "In this house, Marcus Hayes has no power. In this house, the Watchers do not exist. You are safe, but I do not house ghosts. I want to know how a princess ended up in my gutter." Destiny looked down at her hands, now clean and pale against the silk duvet. The high-tech monitors chirped a steady, reassuring rhythm, a heartbeat that sounded like a drum of war. For the first time in weeks, the wall of traumatic silence began to crack. She looked back up at the man who looked like the devil but had acted like a savior, and for a fleeting second, the fear in her eyes shifted to a cold, burning defiance. The meal had given her strength, but Jin Ho's presence had given her something more dangerous, a reason to finally tell the story that Marcus had tried to bury in the snow. The silence in the medical suite felt different now. It was no longer a heavy, suffocating blanket, but a stage waiting for a long-buried truth. Destiny sat upright, her small frame swallowed by the expansive silk sheets, while Jin Ho Park remained an immovable pillar of shadow in the corner. For a moment, the only sound was the rhythmic, high-tech pulse of the monitors, a digital reminder that she was still alive, despite every effort by her own blood to ensure she wasn't. Destiny looked down at her hands. They were clean now, the grime of the industrial district scrubbed away, but she could still feel the phantom chill of the rain and the rough bite of her uncle's grip. She took a breath, and for the first time in weeks, the air didn't catch in a throat constricted by terror. The walls of this penthouse were thick, guarded by men who moved like ghosts and a man who looked at the world like he owned it. For the first time, the threat Marcus Hayes had leveled against her life felt smaller than the protection offered by the man sitting across from her. They didn't just take the money, Destiny began, her voice cracking initially before settling into a low, haunting melody of grief and steel. They took the world. They took my parents' voices. She looked at Jin Ho, her almond-shaped eyes shimmering with unshed tears that refused to fall. She told him about the night the news broke, how the silver lining of her life turned into a leaden shroud. She described the legal gangbang that followed, a term her father's old business rivals had once used for hostile takeovers, but one that now perfectly described the violation of her family's legacy. Marcus and Monica hadn't acted alone. They had moved with the synchronized cruelty of a pack of wolves. Within hours of the crash, they had summoned her father's own personal attorneys, men who had sat at their dinner table, men who had received generous bonuses and seen their children's tuition paid by Williams Global. But loyalty, Destiny realized, was a currency that devalued the moment the source of the wealth stopped breathing. They had papers, she whispered, her fingers curling into the duvet. Papers I know my father never signed. They used the chaos of the search and rescue to forge a new reality. They bribed the firm, bought the senior partners with promises of even larger retainers from the new management, and within 48 hours, they had a court order. $1 billion inheritance, decades of my father's sweat and my mother's heart, transferred to Marcus as the sole executor. They made me a ward of the state on paper, while in reality, they made me a prisoner in my own home. Jin Ho didn't move, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. His dark eyes narrowed, his piercing gaze absorbing every detail of her betrayal. He had seen the underworld's brutality, but there was a specific, polished evil in family members who preyed on their own. Destiny described the final confrontation. She told him how Marcus had laughed while drinking her father's vintage scotch, boasting about how easy it was to turn radical generosity into a weapon against the very people who practiced it. They had used the lawyers to freeze every account associated with Destiny's name, ensuring she didn't have a single cent to fight back. Then came the threats. Marcus had leaned into her face, his eyes glassy with greed and whiskey, promising her that if she spoke to a single journalist or a single officer, he would ensure the tragedy of the Williams family was completed with her funeral. He told me the world wouldn't care about a mafia brat or a spoiled heiress once the narrative was set, Destiny said, a spark of defiance lighting up her sad features. They told the press I was distraught and had gone away to a private retreat in Europe to mourn. Then, they drove me to the abandoned factory district in the middle of a storm and threw me out like a bag of trash. They left me to die, Jin Ho. They didn't just want the money. They wanted me erased so they could enjoy the blood money without the guilt of looking at my face. She told him about the Watchers, the hired goons Marcus used to patrol the streets, ensuring she never wandered too close to the light or found a hand to pull her up. She described the weeks of silence, the way she had matted her hair and hidden in the shadows, becoming the ghost they wanted her to be just to stay alive. As she finished, the room fell back into a silence that was now electric with Jin Ho's simmering fury. He stood up slowly, the leather of his jacket creaking, his tall, muscular frame casting a shadow that seemed to reach every corner of the suite. He walked to the window, looking out over the sprawling city, a city where Marcus Hayes was currently celebrating a stolen life. Jin-ho didn't offer a platitude. He didn't tell her it would be okay. Instead, he turned back to her, his expression controlled but his stare intimidating in its focus. "They used the law to steal from you," he said, his voice a low, melodic rumble of impending doom. "They used your silence to build their throne, but Marcus Hayes made a mistake. He forgot that the law is only one way to claim a debt." He walked back to the bed, his Patek Philippe watch glinting under the sterile lights. "He thinks he erased you, Destiny. He thinks he turned a billionaire's daughter into a ghost. But he brought you to my doorstep, and in my world, we don't ignore ghosts. We give them the fire they need to burn their enemies down." For the first time since the plane fell from the sky, Destiny felt a sensation other than fear or hunger. It was a cold, sharp clarity. She looked at the man who had picked her up from the slush, a man who lived in the shadows but understood the light better than her own kin. The breaking of the seal was complete. The truth was out, and as Jin-ho Park turned to leave the room to summon his men, Destiny knew that the legal gangbang of her uncle was about to meet the underworld justice of the dragon. The Hayes had taken everything, but they had left her with her life, and now they were about to find out that life was the only thing Jin-ho Park needed to take it all back. The atmosphere in the penthouse shifted the moment Destiny finished her story, the air growing heavy and ionized, like the moments preceding a catastrophic lightning strike. Jin-ho Park did not scream, nor did he throw the crystal glass sitting on the mahogany side table. Instead, he simply went still, a terrifying, absolute stillness that made the high-tech medical monitors chirp with a sudden, anxious tempo. For the first time, his stoic mask didn't just crack. It dissolved, revealing a gaze of such concentrated, cold fury that even the shadows in the room seemed to retreat. This was the dragon that the underworld whispered about in hushed tones, a man whose anger didn't burn, but froze everything it touched. He stood and walked toward a sleek, black console that rose from the floor at his approach. With a flick of his wrist, the Patek Philippe on his arm caught the blue light of a dozen holographic screens that bloomed into existence. This was the nerve center of his global intelligence network, a digital web that stretched into every bank vault, satellite, and encrypted server on the planet. He didn't need a courtroom or a warrant. He had the keys to the world's secrets, and he was about to turn them all against Marcus and Monica Hayes. "Trace the Williams Global Estate Executors," Jin-ho commanded, his voice a low, vibrating growl that held the promise of a funeral. "I want every transaction, every offshore account, and every live feed associated with the Hayes name. Now." The screens blurred with data, a waterfall of numbers and legal filings that would have taken a team of forensic accountants years to untangle. To Jin-ho, it was a roadmap of a crime. He watched as the digital fingerprints of Marcus Hayes appeared, showing a systematic, gut-wrenching liquidation of everything Destiny's parents had built. One screen flickered to life, showing a grainy, high-definition feed from a hidden security camera in a high-end luxury boutique downtown. Destiny leaned forward, her breath hitching in her chest as she saw them. Marcus and Monica were standing at a velvet-covered counter, surrounded by shopping bags that cost more than a year of a common man's salary. Monica was laughing, her sharp face lit with a predatory joy as she tried on a necklace of emeralds that had been bought with funds diverted from Sarah Williams' favorite children's foundation. Beside her, Marcus was pointing at a display of watches, his smug grin wider than it had ever been when he was begging Elias for loans. "They aren't just taking the money," Jin-ho whispered, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering light of the screens. "They are erasing the kindness that earned it." He tapped a key, and a new set of data cascaded down. He saw the legal gangbang in real time, the transfers moving from Destiny's father's charities into private holding companies. He watched as Marcus signed off on the sale of a community medical wing to pay for a custom-built Italian sports car. The Hayes weren't just living large. They were feasting on the carcass of a legacy, tearing apart the bridges Elias and Sarah had built to line their own pockets with jewelry and carbon fiber. Jin-ho's jaw tightened, a muscle leaping in his cheek. He watched a live feed from the Williams estate, Destiny's home. Monica was directing movers to take her mother's hand-painted vases into the guest house, her expression one of cool, manipulative control. She moved through the halls with an air of self-interest that made Destiny's stomach turn. They were redecorating the sanctuary of her childhood with the spoils of their betrayal. "They think they are invisible," Jin-ho said, his stare becoming so intimidating that the air in the suite felt thin. "They think because they bought the lawyers and threatened a child, the world has gone blind. They are enjoying the warmth of a fire they started with your life." He turned back to Destiny, the blue light of the screens making his sharp jawline look like it was carved from obsidian. The quiet intensity in his gaze was no longer just about observation. It was about execution. He saw the way she looked at the screens, the mix of innocence and a newly forged defiance. She was seeing the rot of her own blood, and he was making sure she saw it clearly. "Marcus Hayes believes wealth is a shield," Jin-ho continued, his voice dropping into that melodic, terrifying register. "He believes that because he has the papers, he has the power. He is currently buying a fleet of cars to replace the love he stole. He is buying emeralds to hide the fact that his soul is black." Jin-ho reached out, his hand hovering over a final command on the console. "I have tracked every cent. I have seen every smile they shared over your parents' grave. I have the watchers located, and I have the lawyers' secret ledgers." He looked at Destiny, his intense dark brown eyes promising a reckoning that no legal system could offer. The cold fury wasn't just a reaction, it was a strategy. He wasn't going to just stop them. He was going to dismantle them piece by piece, starting with the very things they loved most. "They want to live like royalty?" Jin-ho asked, a dark, joyless smile touching his lips. "Then we shall give them a coronation the city will never forget. They took everything from you, Destiny. Now I am going to take the world from them, and I'm going to make them watch while I give it back to you." He shut down the screens with a final, decisive swipe. The room plunged back into the soft, ambient glow of the medical suite, but the energy had changed. The dragon was no longer just watching. The hunt had begun. Marcus and Monica Hayes were still in that boutique, clinking glasses and celebrating their stolen fortune, entirely unaware that the man who read souls for a living had just marked them for extinction. The cold fury of Jin-ho Park was now a living thing, a shadow that was already stretching across the city to find the Hayes in their den of stolen gold. The scent of expensive perfume and false grief arrived at the park penthouse long before Marcus and Monica Hayes even stepped off the private elevator. News in the upper echelons of the city traveled like a contagion, and word that a mysterious benefactor had rescued a girl matching the description of the missing Williams heiress had reached the Hayes' ears within hours. The vultures had spent weeks picking the bones of Destiny's inheritance clean, but the realization that the ghost they had created might still have a voice sent them into a frantic, calculated panic. They knew that to maintain their stolen empire, they had to reclaim the girl before she could dismantle the lies they had so carefully constructed. Jin-ho Park stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his living area, his back to the elevator doors as the chimes signaled their arrival. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal three-piece suit, his Patek Philippe watch catching the glint of the city lights below. Destiny sat in a high-backed armchair nearby, partially shielded by the architectural shadows of the room. She was wearing a soft, cream-colored silk dress, a gift from Jin-ho, but as the elevator doors slid open, her fingers dug into the fabric, her almond-shaped eyes widening with a sudden, sharp influx of terror. Marcus stepped out first, his stocky frame squeezed into a bespoke tuxedo that looked like it had been bought with a dead man's credit card. He smoothed his short-cropped hair, his square jaw set in an expression of practiced, paternal concern. Beside him, Monica glided forward, her sharp face carefully painted with the hues of a mourning ant. She wore a black designer dress and carried a lace handkerchief, her high heels clicking against the polished marble floor with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown to destiny. "Oh, thank heaven," Monica cried out, her voice a pitch-perfect imitation of relief. She didn't wait for a greeting, her eyes scanning the expansive, minimalist room until they landed on the girl in the chair. "Destiny, my sweet, poor girl, we have been absolutely sick with worry." Marcus followed her lead, his smug grin buried under a mask of heavy-hearted responsibility. He approached Jin-ho with an outstretched hand, though he didn't dare make eye contact for long with the man whose presence made the air in the room feel thin and dangerous. "Mr. Park, I cannot tell you what this means to us. Our niece. She's been so distraught since the accident. Her mind hasn't been right. She wandered off from the private retreat we arranged for her, and we've had every private investigator in the state looking for her. Destiny's breath hitched, a soft, wounded sound that Jin-ho caught instantly. She looked at her uncle, the man who had bruised her arm and threatened to bury her, and saw him standing there, acting as though he hadn't been the one to shove her into the mud. The manipulation was so seamless, so polished, that for a moment, the old traumatic silence tried to pull her back under the waves. Jin-ho did not turn around immediately. He allowed the silence to stretch, a cold, suffocating vacuum that forced Marcus to shift his weight from one foot to the other. When Jin-ho finally moved, it was with the slow, predatory grace of a man who had already seen the end of the game. He turned, his sharp jawline highlighted by the dim ambient light, and his intense dark brown eyes locked onto Marcus Hayes. "Searching everywhere?" Jin-ho asked, his voice a low, melodic rumble that made Monica's hand tremor as she dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes. "That is a dedicated effort for a girl you claimed was in Europe." Marcus didn't blink, his calculating mind already spinning a new thread of the lie. "It was a misunderstanding with the press, Mr. Park. We wanted to protect her privacy. You know how the media vultures can be. We just wanted our girl home where she belongs." Monica rushed toward Destiny, her high-pitched heels echoing. "Come, darling, stand up. We have your room ready. The doctors are waiting. You've put us through such a scare, wandering into these dangerous parts of the city." She reached out a hand, her high cheekbones sharp and her gaze cold behind the fake smile. It wasn't an invitation, it was a command. Destiny shrank back into the chair. The warrior's soul Jin-ho had recognized flickering, but threatened by the sheer audacity of their lies. She looked at the hand Monica offered, the same hand that had adjusted a pearl necklace while Destiny was kicked into the rain. "She is not going anywhere." The command from Jin-ho was absolute. He stepped into the light, his tall, muscular frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow both Marcus and Monica. His expression was calm, controlled, but his stare had become so intimidating that the air in the penthouse seemed to vibrate. "Mr. Park, I think there's been a mistake," Marcus said, his voice dropping into a harder, more hard-set register as his smugness began to leak through the mask. "We are her legal guardians. We have the papers. While we appreciate your hospitality toward a confused girl, we'll be taking our niece now." "You speak of papers," Jin-ho said, walking slowly toward them, his presence commanding the room. "You speak of guardianship. Yet, while you were searching for her, my monitors found you in a boutique downtown, laughing over emeralds and Wagyu beef. I saw the liquidation of the Williams charities, Marcus. I saw the diverted funds." The color drained from Monica's face, her maternal aura vanishing to reveal the sharp, manipulative edge beneath. Marcus's square jaw tightened, the scar on his cheek flushing an angry red. The vultures had come to reclaim their prey, expecting to find a broken girl and a disinterested billionaire. Instead, they had walked into the den of a man who read souls for sport. "We don't know what you're talking about," Monica hissed, her fake smile finally snapping. "This is a family matter. You have no right to keep her here." Jin-ho stopped inches from Marcus, his dark eyes like two pits of frozen fire. "In this city, I have the right to whatever I choose to protect. You did not come here for a niece. You came here because you realized that a ghost can still testify." He turned his gaze to Destiny, his expression softening just enough for her to see the fire he was offering her. "Destiny, tell them where they found you." Destiny looked up, her rich brown skin illuminated by the penthouse lights. She looked at Marcus, who was glaring at her with a silent promise of violence, and at Monica, whose thin lips were pressed into a line of pure malice. For the first time, she saw them not as the powerful giants who had stolen her life, but as the small, rotting creatures they truly were. "You didn't find me," Destiny said, her voice small but clear, cutting through the tension. "You threw me out. You told me I would be buried if I spoke." Marcus took an impulsive step forward, his stocky frame tensing. "You little." Before he could finish, two of Jin-ho's guards appeared from the shadows behind the furniture, their presence a silent, lethal warning. Jin-ho didn't move a muscle, but the quiet intensity in his gaze made Marcus freeze in his tracks. "The vultures have circled long enough," Jin-ho said, his melodic voice now a death knell. You came here with fake tears, looking for a victim. You found the dragon instead. Now, I suggest you enjoy the last few minutes of the wealth you stole, because by the time the sun rises, the name Hayes will mean nothing in this city." He made a sharp gesture, and the guards stepped forward to escort the stunned, trembling couple back to the elevator. Monica clutched her lace handkerchief, her elegant clothes now looking like a costume on a failing actress. Marcus looked back one last time, his smug grin replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. As the elevator doors closed, the silence returned, but this time, it was the silence of a battlefield after the first decisive blow. The vultures had tried to close the cage, but they had only succeeded in ensuring their own destruction. Heavy silence that followed the Hayes' failed attempt to reclaim destiny was merely the calm before a devastating storm. Jin-Ho Park did not let them leave the building. Instead, his guards intercepted them at the elevator, redirecting them deep into the heart of the penthouse, to the inner sanctum where the real business of the Park Empire was transacted. The room was vast and windowless, dominated by a wall of high-definition monitors that flickered with the cold, blue light of global data streams. The air here was thin and chilled, smelling of ozone and expensive cologne, creating a suffocating atmosphere that made Marcus pull at his tuxedo collar, and Monica clutch her pearls until her knuckles turned white. Jin-Ho entered behind them, his presence filling the room like a physical weight. He did not sit. He stood behind a sleek obsidian console, his sharp jawline set in a mask of absolute authority. Destiny stood beside him, no longer shrinking into the shadows, her almond eyes fixed on the aunt and uncle who had once seemed like giants, but now looked like small, trapped animals. "You spoke of legacy," Jin-Ho began, his voice a low, melodic rumble that echoed off the brushed steel walls. "You spoke of guardianship, but in my world, legacy is not something you steal, it is something you defend. And you have done nothing but rot the very house that fed you." Marcus tried to muster one last shred of his smug defiance, his square jaw tightening as he looked at the screens. "You're overstepping, Park. Whatever you think you know, it's all legal. The papers are signed. The firm has verified everything. You can't just hold us here." "Legal," Jin-Ho repeated, the word sounding like a curse on his tongue. He tapped a command onto the glass surface of the console. "Let us see the legality of your greed." The wall of screens exploded into life. It was a digital execution. The first screen showed a high-speed ticker of the Williams global accounts. In the center, a large red number represented the billions of dollars Marcus had diverted. With a single, decisive keystroke from Jin-Ho, the number began to plummet. "The forged signatures on the probate documents?" Jin-Ho asked, his intense dark brown eyes reflecting the cascading data. "My forensic analysts found the digital breadcrumbs. I've already sent the original, uncorrupted files to the federal prosecutor, but they won't reach you for another hour. In the meantime, I decided to handle the civil matters myself." Monica gasped as a second screen showed a live feed of the Williams estate, the sanctuary she had so gleefully redecorated. A fleet of black SUVs was pulling into the gravel driveway. Men in tactical gear were not just removing furniture, they were changing the locks and sealing the doors with tape. "That's our home," Monica shrieked, her maternal aura completely replaced by a sharp, predatory panic. "It was never yours," Jin-Ho replied coldly. "It belongs to the Williams estate, and as of 3 minutes ago, the court-appointed receivership, under my direction, has reclaimed it. You are officially trespassers in your own lives." The display shifted again. It showed Marcus's private holding accounts, the offshore safety nets he had built with the blood of Destiny's father's charities. Before their eyes, the balances were wiped to zero. One by one, the assets flickered and died. The custom sports car, repossessed. The emerald necklace Monica had tried on. The payment had been flagged as fraudulent, and the boutique's security had been notified to reclaim it from her hotel room. "You used a legal gangbang to strip a child of her birthright," Jin-Ho said, his stare becoming so intimidating that Marcus took a stumbling step back. "So, I used my network to strip you of your oxygen. You have no accounts, no credit, no standing. In the eyes of the world, Marcus and Monica Hayes no longer exist as anything more than common thieves." The most devastating blow came last. A screen lit up with a video feed from the boardroom of Williams Global. The senior partners of the law firm, the men who had accepted Marcus's bribes, were being escorted out in handcuffs, their faces blurred by shame. "Your friends have already confessed," Jin-ho said, his voice dropping into that melodic, terrifying register. "They traded your names for a lighter sentence. They described how you laughed about sending Destiny to the streets. They told me how you toasted to her unfortunate end." Marcus looked at the screen, his stocky frame trembling. The smugness was gone, replaced by the hollow, gray realization that he had played a game against a dragon and lost everything. He looked at Destiny, trying to find a spark of the niece he could manipulate, but he found only the cold, hard reflection of Jin-ho's fire. "Please," Monica whispered, her sharp face contorted in a mix of rage and terror. "You can't do this. We're family." "Family protects," Jin-ho said, leaning over the console, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "Family sacrifices, you are parasites, and I have just finished the treatment." He made a final gesture to his guards. The display screens went black, leaving the room in a heavy, oppressive darkness lit only by the glowing medical monitors in the distance. The display of power was absolute. In less than 10 minutes, Jin-ho Park had dismantled a billion-dollar heist and reduced the villains to the very thing they had tried to make Destiny: nobodies. "Take them to the lobby," Jin-ho commanded. "Ensure they have exactly what they gave her, nothing but the clothes on their backs. If they are ever seen near the Williams estate or this penthouse again, they won't be dealing with the law. They will be dealing with me." As the guards dragged the sobbing Monica and the broken, silent Marcus toward the exit, Destiny stood tall. She watched them go, not with hatred, but with a profound, quiet relief. The rot had been exposed and excised. She looked at Jin-ho, whose stoic mask was back in place, though his eyes still burned with a protective intensity. The inner sanctum had been the site of her parents' ultimate vindication, and as the heavy steel doors closed on her past, Destiny knew that the silence of the streets would never haunt her again. The dragon had spoken, and the world was finally right again. The aftermath of the confrontation left the inner sanctum in a state of solemn, heavy peace. The monitors had gone dark, the digital execution of Marcus and Monica Hayes complete, but the air still vibrated with the kinetic energy of Jin-ho Park's authority. Destiny stood by the obsidian console, her silhouette reflected in the polished surface, looking not at the screens that had displayed her victory, but at the man who had made it possible. The terror that had defined her existence for weeks had evaporated, replaced by a crystalline clarity that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Jin-ho moved with his characteristic quiet intensity, his black leather jacket discarded, revealing the crisp white shirt beneath. He picked up a fountain pen, a heavy silver instrument that looked more like a weapon than a tool, and laid a single, thick sheet of parchment on the desk. This was not a court order or a bank transfer. It was a document of a different kind, one that carried the weight of the underworld and the sanctity of a vow. "The money is back in your name, Destiny," Jin-ho said, his voice a low, melodic rumble that seemed to ground her to the floor. "The Williams estate is secure. The lawyers who betrayed you are being processed by the state, and the watchers who hunted you have been neutralized." He looked at her, his intense dark brown eyes softening just enough to reveal the man beneath the dragon's mask. "But money is only paper. It can be stolen again. It can be forged, manipulated, and drained by those who know how to play the system. I didn't take you off the street just to make you a rich orphan again." Destiny walked toward him, the silk of her cream dress whispering against the floor. She watched as he unscrewed the cap of the pen. "What is that?" she asked, her voice steady and clear. "The last traces of the silent beggar, gone." "This is an adoption decree," Jin-ho replied, his sharp jawline set in a mask of absolute resolve. "In the eyes of the law, it makes me your guardian. In the eyes of my world, it makes you untouchable. I am not just giving you back your father's wealth. I am giving you my name. I am giving you the Shield of Park." He signed the document with a series of quick, aggressive strokes, the silver pen glinting under the lights. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look for a way out. For a man who lived a life of physical and mental discipline, this was the ultimate commitment. He pushed the paper toward her, and for a heartbeat, the room was silent. "From this moment forward," he continued, his stare becoming intimidatingly protective, "you are Destiny Williams Park. Anyone who looks at you will see the daughter of Elias Williams, but they will feel the shadow of Jin-Ho Park. To touch you will be to declare war on the dragon. To threaten you will be to forfeit their own existence. Destiny looked down at the signature. The name Park was written in a script that was bold and uncompromising, a shield made of ink and iron. She picked up the pen, her rich brown skin a beautiful contrast to the silver instrument. She thought of her parents, of her father's kindness and her mother's grace. She knew they would have seen the honor in this man's soul, despite the darkness of his profession. They had been builders. Jin-Ho was a protector. She signed her name beside his. As the ink dried, she felt a strange tectonic shift in her identity. She was no longer the girl shivering behind a dumpster, terrified of every passing SUV. She was no longer the victim of a legal gangbang by her own kin. She was someone new. She was a bridge between two worlds, one of radical generosity and one of absolute power. Jin-Ho reached out, his hand hovering near her shoulder before he placed it there, a rare gesture of physical affection. His touch was heavy and warm, a solid anchor in a world that had tried to drift her out to sea. "I grew up in the dark, Destiny," he said, his melodic voice dropping into a register of profound sincerity. "I built this empire so that I would never have to be afraid again, but I forgot that power is empty if it doesn't protect the light. You are that light. You stayed a warrior when you had nothing. You kept your dignity when they tried to turn you into a ghost." He leaned down, his piercing gaze locking onto hers with a promise that she felt in her very marrow. "No one will ever touch you again. Not Marcus. Not the lawyers. Not the shadows. You have the name of the man who owns the shadows." Destiny looked up at him, her almond-shaped eyes reflecting the strength he was offering her. She saw the Patek Philippe on his wrist, a symbol of the time he had given her, and the sharp jawline that had become her fortress. She wasn't just safe, she was powerful. "Thank you, Father," she whispered. The word hung in the air, a new foundation for a life that had been torn down to the studs. Jin-Ho didn't smile, it wasn't in his nature, but the quiet intensity in his gaze flickered with a pride that was more valuable than all the billions he had recovered. He took the paper, folded it, and placed it into a hidden compartment in the console. The Shield of Park was now active. The young black girl who had been cast out of her own home was now the princess of a different kind of palace. As they walked out of the inner sanctum together, Jin-Ho's muscular frame shielding her as they entered the main penthouse, Destiny knew that the hunt was over. The vultures had been scattered, the rot had been removed, and in its place stood a bond of blood and ink that no plane crash or forged document could ever break. She was Destiny Williams Park, and for the first time in her life, she knew that the future wasn't something to be feared. It was something she was going to lead. The morning sun didn't just rise over the city. It seemed to ignite the glass and steel of the skyline, turning the urban sprawl into a sea of shimmering gold. It was a day that felt heavy with the weight of destiny fulfilled, a sharp contrast to the gray, blade-like rain that had once tried to drown a girl who had lost everything. Destiny Williams Park stood at the threshold of the Williams Global Headquarters, the very building her father had built from a single shipping container into a billion-dollar empire. The lobby was a cathedral of light and polished marble, humming with the quiet energy of a company restored to its true purpose. As Destiny walked through the entrance, the air didn't feel cold or indifferent as it had when she was a ghost on the streets. Instead, a wave of respectful silence followed her. The security detail, men in sharp black suits who moved with the silent discipline of the park lineage, fanned out behind her, a living shield that signaled to the world that the Princess of Seoul had returned with the fire of a dragon at her back. She was no longer the broken girl in the oversized navy jacket, hiding her matted curls and shivering behind dumpsters. Today, her deep brown skin glowed with health and a fierce, quiet confidence. Her natural black hair was styled into a crown of perfect, bouncy afro curls that framed a face that had traded fear for a terrifyingly beautiful defiance. She wore a tailored white power suit, the stark color a symbol of a fresh start, with a subtle diamond brooch that had once belonged to her mother pinned over her heart. She stepped into the private elevator, the same one she had ridden as a child while holding her father's hand. When the doors opened on the top floor, she found herself standing at the entrance to her father's office. For weeks, Marcus and Monica had turned this space into a shrine to their own greed, filling it with tacky gold accents and the stench of stolen luxury. But Jin Ho had been thorough. The office had been restored to its former glory. The original mahogany desk, the scent of sandalwood and old books, and the walls lined with the awards her parents had received for their radical generosity. But there was a new addition, a portrait behind the desk. It wasn't just of Elias and Sarah Williams. Beside it hung a subtle, minimalist frame containing the adoption decree she had signed with Jin Ho. It was a reminder that the past had been reclaimed, but the future was protected by a new kind of strength. Destiny walked to the desk, running her fingers over the smooth wood. She felt the presence of her parents in the room, but for the first time, it didn't bring a sharp ache of grief. It brought a sense of duty. She was 18 years old, a billionaire's heir and a mafia boss's daughter, and she knew exactly what she was going to do with the empire she had won back. "The board is waiting for you," a low, melodic voice rumbled from the doorway. Destiny turned to see Jin Ho Park standing there. He was impeccably dressed in a black suit that seemed to absorb the morning light, his sharp jawline set in a rare, subtle expression of pride. He didn't look like a man who had just dismantled a criminal conspiracy. He looked like a father watching his legacy take flight. His intense dark brown eyes met hers, and the quiet intensity between them spoke of a bond that was stronger than any legal document. "Let them wait another minute," Destiny said, her voice rich and steady. "I want to see the city first." They walked together toward the floor-to-ceiling glass doors that led to the expansive balcony. As they stepped out, the wind whipped around them, high above the noise and the rot of the streets. From this height, the city looked like a masterpiece of order and potential. Destiny leaned against the railing. The Patek Philippe watch Jin Ho had given her glinting in the sun, a reminder that her time had finally begun. "The Hayes Center for Homeless Youth opened its doors this morning," Destiny said, looking out toward the industrial district where she had once nearly died. "I've ensured that every child who comes through those doors will never have to be a ghost. They will have the education my parents wanted for me and the protection you gave me." Jin Ho stood beside her, his tall, muscular frame a solid anchor against the wind. "Justice is a cold foundation, Destiny, but loyalty is what makes the structure stand." He looked at her, his piercing gaze softening as he saw the woman she had become. "You have both now. You are a Williams by blood and a Park by choice. No one in this city will ever be able to move you again." Destiny looked down at the streets below, where the black SUVs of her security detail were parked like a phalanx of steel. She thought about the night she had collapsed at Jin Ho's gate, a girl with nothing but a cracked photo and a warrior's soul. She realized then that her uncle hadn't just taken everything from her, he had inadvertently given her the world. He had put her on the path to the only man who could teach her how to turn her kindness into a weapon and her grief into a shield. A new family had been built on the ashes of betrayal. A family not defined by the legal gangbang of greedy relatives, but by the ironclad justice of a man who lived in the shadows and a girl who had found her way back to the light. "Shall we go?" Jin Ho asked, gesturing toward the boardroom where the future of the city waited for her command. Destiny took one last look at the horizon, the sun now fully overhead, bathing everything in a blinding, triumphant white. She reached out and took Jin Ho's arm, her hand steady and her heart full. "Yes," she replied, her smile finally reaching her almond-shaped eyes. "We have a lot of bridges to build, Father." As they walked back into the office together, the doors closing on the wind, the story of the silent beggar officially ended. The era of Destiny Williams Park had begun, and the city would never be the same again. They lived not just happily, but powerfully ever after, a legacy of love defended by a throne of iron. If you believe Uncle Marcus and Aunt Monica got exactly what they deserved, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of ultimate justice. What would you have done if you were in Jin Ho's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for staying with us. Stay blessed and stay beautiful.